Alright, listeners, it's Ryan and Megan, and welcome to the Mental Health Mixtape, a podcast dedicated to fostering open conversations, sharing stories, and exploring a diverse range of topics related to mental health. So hold on to your seats as we sit down with some amazing guests to get their perspectives on the ever-changing landscape of mental health. And for all you old folks, no need to hit the record and pause button. Just sit back and let us navigate life's playlist together. During this podcast, you may hear stories about traumatic events and our guests' experiences. There may be discussions about suicide, traumatic events, and the outcomes from these events on personal lives. If you're struggling with anything you hear, please reach out to your peer support team, psychologist, call 911, or head to the nearest hospital. In Canada, you could call Boots on the Ground peer support for first responders at 1-833-677-2668. Talk Suicide Canada at 1-833-456-4566. And in the United States, call 988 for the National Crisis and Suicide Lifeline. It should be noted that the information shared on this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and should not be considered a substitute for professional medical, psychological advice, diagnosis, or treatment.
This is going to be fun. Welcome, Steve. Welcome. I mean, I know you and Megan know each other, and you and I we were just chatting before we hopped online here about the creepy 21st century kind of stalking that people do now through social media and LinkedIn and other things. So it is great to finally meet you in person over virtual. I can't wait to shake your hand and see where this goes.
Yes, it's amazing. I love the interconnection of the internets because you get to meet all kinds of people internationally, and I think that's amazing, right? We so crave human connection, and social media can really disconnect us, but this stuff is just very cool.
Yeah, and then it leads us here, and And you right now are at home. You're in BC.
That's correct.
And you said it's beautiful out.
Beautiful, gorgeous sunny day, crisp.
Green grass and flowers blooming. Let me guess.
Yeah, no snow on the ground.
Come on.
And Ryan's in Calgary, and I'm in snowy Edmonton. So yes, this is the power of this digital world we live in, which, I think has the power to disconnect, but also can do some pretty amazing things. So Steve, welcome. It's so nice to see you.
Always love to see you as well.
I don't think we've seen each other since Manitoba, right? That was the last time.
That's correct. Yeah, when we presented together to the Manitoba Fire Chiefs.
Yes, and now here we are. So we have so much to talk about. I have so many things I want to ask you about. The first thing we ask, Steve, it's really honestly the only question we ask of anybody who comes in and has these conversations with us, is just to say, like, in your words, how did you get to be where you are in this moment? Ryan and I are always so interested by people's stories, like how they came to be interested in these mental health conversations. So that's our only question is how did you come to be the you that you are today?
That's a great question. I mean, I could go all the way back to the relationship with my mom. Am I going to lay down on the couch and have that conversation? But how I got into the mental health work, it's a bit of a sad story, actually. It was predicated by 2 back-to-back suicides in Surrey 7 weeks apart. And that kind of shook our world to the core here in BC. And it kind of put us on this trajectory of, we've got to pull this out of the shadows and really talk about it. And so that's how I was doing a lot of health and safety work before that, and a bit of a keener, was organizing the folks across BC that were health and safety minded. And I just got kind of thrown on this mental health committee, and they're like, fix the problem. And I'm like, well, we got to find out what the problem is. We know what the result is, unfortunately. But so we did a deep dive basically and canvassed all of our locals, affiliates, and members, and asked why, like, what's going on? Do you have enough education? Do you seek help? Like, so we asked all these questions and basically did a kind of a gap analysis. And at the same time, the BC government and WorkSafe BC said, we better do something about this. And they formed a first responder committee. And through my association, I got put on there as I call myself one of the OGs of that committee back in 2016. And I've seen lots of people come and go, and it's grown and created tons of resources. And so, I mean, I guess that's what kind of threw me into this world, is tragedy, really. But from that, I've seen so many cool and amazing things of people getting healthy, seeking help, like early interventions, right? Like transformations of people that were psychologically injured and going back to thriving and retiring healthy. So, and you've seen this in your world as well. And it's that what keeps me going is those wins. And like really tragically, we just had another loss in Delta here. And along the way we've had a few, and that's just here in BC, right? We've seen this, we've had tragedy, and you're not going to save everybody, but that's the sad reality of this work. But yeah, so that's my how and why and what keeps me going. So.
Okay, and so can you just I know you have your role with the British Columbia Professional Firefighters Association. Are you still president? What are you?
I've got just a raise a raise in profile. I'm the executive vice president, mostly because the guy that was in that role, Rob Weeks, is now the deputy chief of ops or training in Vancouver Fire. So he stepped down and moved over. We call it a dark side, but he's going to do amazing work in that role. And so yeah, I'm kind of the old fart on our board, and so I just kind of moved up into that role. And I wear a bunch of hats in that role. I'm vice chair of the Health and Safety Committee, the mental health chair, responsible for education, along with Todd Shearling and Brian Katniss, who are the president and secretary of the association. So that's my association role, and still a captain on Engine 1 in Coquitlam. So I'm just still riding the truck, heading back there on Sunday, and counting the days down, to be quite honest with you. We got a year and 2 months to go. So.
And then you've got all sorts of crunch times. Yeah.
And then that frees me up to do work with Matt and you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
well, and I mean, I appreciate, it's always hard to reflect on. I mean, I was just thinking when you said what got you started was tragedy. And I mean, if I look at some of the work that I've done in my career, it's commonly started from that place, right? Somebody died in a tragic way, somebody took their life, and it's oftentimes out of that tragedy that people go, we need to do something better or different or whatever. So, I mean, I think there's a note there about trying to not have someone's life or death be in vain, and trying to take something and do something with it, and I think it sounds like that's been kind of a driving factor. Hey?
Yeah, for sure. And I had this old crusty captain when I got on the fire service back in 1997, in Coquitlam anyway. He said, leave it better than you found it. And I took that really to heart, and I wanted to make sure that the career that what I left behind was better. People were more connected. It was safer. We had, we've got infrared saunas in the fire hall. We focused on cancer prevention. And so I wanted to really champion a lot of these issues with a team of people, of course. And so I did. I just didn't want to coast through a career. And I think that I took those words to heart.
And I think honestly for me, and Ryan, I'll shut up in a second and let you talk. But I mean, Steve, I just find that to be something that's really inspiring about you. I find that inspiring about people. I find that inspiring about you, that you're I'm not just going to sit back and let somebody else make it better for me or for others. I'm going to try and have a part to play in that myself. So thank you for that.
I was just waiting for you guys to keep going, because I mean, you guys obviously have some history. You know each other. You've done presentations together. But I echo what Megan said. Having been in this work myself for 23 years, thankfully retired and stepped away to support the BOSS program and all the other facets of stuff that I've done over the years. It's a really hard kind of place to be. Leaving the service better than what it was when you first stepped in, or at least making a difference for one individual, I think is where I've always come from. And I find that, it's the organizational and culture of first responders really that, we are really good at doing response. We just need to move. We always are reacting. And this is where I kind of want to get your viewpoint on that over the span of your careers. We always react. We're always going out, we're putting out fires, water on the hot stuff, paramedics fix, plug holes, do whatever we do, regardless of the uniform we wear. How did you see that kind of transition, or have you actually seen that transition more to a proactive kind of, let's take a look on the front end, because we train so hard to do our roles, but what about it in mental health that we don't train in? So have you seen that shift, I guess, is one question. The next question is do you see that changing even more so after you've left service? I don't know. It's just kind of one of those things that I always wrestle with.
I think that's why we were destined to meet. I know Megan and I were for sure how we got connected, because we want to get upstream, right? That was the whole point of BOSS, is before operational stress, right? And that's the work that I've been doing with Matt Johnson is this. Well, we do this with the BC Firefighter Resiliency Program. We know that we got to get upstream, right? We've been swimming in those waters below the waterfall and throwing people, and it's too late. And so through my whole career, it was suck it up, buttercup. You hear these constantly, right? And so I've been in this since 92. I was a volunteer firefighter at 19 years old. And so the evolution I've seen is like exactly what you just said, Ryan. It's so operationally focused, throwing ladders, tying ropes, putting bandages on people, like, putting traction, cutting people out of cars, like all this operational stuff. Yet there's no preparation for the psychological impact of that or the accumulation of that. And we wait till when it becomes crisis or chronic.
Yeah.
And so that's where I've seen this evolution, is where the work that we're really focused on is, I do claims work with workers' comp, right? And it's like people wait a year and they go, okay, yeah, I better get help. Well, it's like their marriage is falling apart, they're dysregulated, like they're not sleeping well, and all the things that you already know that we have to deal with. It's really hard to deal with somebody when they wait a year and they've got this dysregulated nervous system and they are jacked, right? And they've got, they're having nightmares and all those things. And now our focus is completely education, awareness, early intervention, identification, breaking down stigma. Like that's been our mantra and mandate. And that's why I do the work with Matt. And that's why we presented the Manitoba Fire Chiefs, was to start that conversation with them, because they're behind. Like they're lacking in resources and education. And I remember looking at that audience and they're just like, they were like deer in the headlights, a lot of them, because they're just like, we're not comfortable with this conversation and we have to call it out. And I said, you don't want to have what we had in BC. And they've had tragedy there. And we've brought 6 people from Manitoba alone, Winnipeg Fire, into BC to go through a resiliency program because there's nothing there. Yeah. So us collectively building these upstream education things for public safety personnel, Matt's been, we've got over 6,000 people registered for our video series for firefighters, like unprecedented since last April. Like I think there's 6,200 people registered. It's like, so the impact that we're making with this education, normalizing the language, getting upstream, like, and so that people go, hey, I should really reach out for help. And I'll share a story with you. I'm on a bit of a rant here, but I was in the truck bay changeover, and this guy, one of the guys I work with, he came up to me and goes, I want to tell you something. Like we work with Dr. Duncan Shields and Matt Johnson did the video series. Well, we've got it in training in the hall. And so they watched the video one night and he goes, I felt seen. I thought they were talking right to me. And they're basically said, take a knee. Get help. There's no shame in that. There's strength and courage in reaching out. And he did. He literally got connected to a counselor. He's coming through our resiliency program later on this year. And he's like, I just realized that I was acting like an asshole. And Matt and I always joke. We say we're going to take assholes and turn them back into assets. So that's our kind of goal. And it's just so cool when you've seen this with your program as well, as where people are having conversations, and that's the key piece. And it's kind of cool. It's exciting to get upstream. I don't know if that answers your question, Ryan, but
no, I love it, Steve. Yeah. And it's funny. I just got a message last night from a woman in BC who's doing some work in like the healthcare system, BC Health or whatever. And she was just talking about running some education groups with folks who are doing like kind of correctional work, but for like forensic medical inpatient kind of thing. So, I mean, they just see so much trauma, right? And like that experience of like starting to talk to them and people are so closed off. And then they have that experience of like, oh my gosh, this is relevant to me. And then you just see people melt, right? And like, and how much heaviness people have been carrying when they haven't had a literacy or language or knowledge about what's actually happening to them, right?
Yeah,
that's wild.
Right. It's interesting you say that, because we did an anti-stigma campaign through our BC First Responder Mental Health Committee. And you've seen this campaign, right? So you got these faces with the words on them. And the one thing that stood out to me, because those are all statements from first responders, from rural, metro, police, fire, paramedic, and they had the words on their face, right? And the one thing that really stood out to Matt and I talk about this all the time is this is the question mark. It's I don't know why I feel this way. And you just said it. It's like giving them the language. It's like that whole, who's the guy who talks about name it to claim it, or name it to tame it? Bessel, Vanderkolk.
Yeah.
Vanderkolk.
Yeah. And I love that, because so many people don't know why they're feeling the way they are. They can't put their finger on it, right? And you've dealt with
Yes.
this so many times. They just, until you give them the aha moment where they go, oh, this is my overacted amygdala, right? Like I'm not in my logical brain, or I'm dysregulated, my nervous, I've got trauma and grief trapped in my body, and they can relate to that.
Totally.
And they go, ooh, that's why I'm like so hyper vigilant. And so it's so cool to see that, someone sees me and hears me, right? It's so cool.
Completely. And I mean, you were just like, yeah, I mean, we've read from the same playbook for a long time, but I mean, exactly, like this is, I mean, for me, and it's, I wonder if the timing lined up. You and I met, I think in 2017, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 2018. I can't
Yep.
remember. It's been a while.
Yeah.
And I want you to talk about Loon Lake in a second, because I think what you're doing with that program is super cool. But that was it. It was just like, and you know, for me with the boss program, and Ryan, I know you have your stories with this. It was just like, why are we waiting until people are years down the line and they're so ashamed and they think there's something fatally flawed about them, when you give them a little bit of education and a little bit of like that peer supportive sort of empathy, and it's like that in and of itself is a massive mechanism of change, right? Like that in and of itself can help people take about 15 steps down the path that they couldn't have done without just that little bit of knowledge. And it's almost like it's like, are we holding this knowledge in reserve or something? It doesn't make any sense to me. So yeah.
Doesn't make any sense, for sure. Yeah, I know we've been aligned for so long about this, and we both share that passion. And the stories that we're hearing from this education awareness piece already, it is literally changing culture. I think that's what we were ultimately trying to do, was change this culture of this, and stoicism gets a bad rap. And I've been reading a lot about stoicism, and I'm sure I'm not a PhD in anything other than life, but that really resonated with me, because we all identify in our world, Ryan, as you know, is this stoic culture, right? But stoicism is awesome. You get shit done, but it's this narrowing, and Shields talks about this, my buddy Duncan. He's like, it's the narrowing of emotions, of the highs and the lows, and you're just like this flatlined personality, and that's not what stoicism is. It's in the moment showing up, but then able to go to still have awe, like when I go by the river and still see the steam coming off the wood as the sun hits it, right? Enjoying those moments, and the lows, like, with tragedy and grief, being able to cry and get that out of you. And my daughter will say this, like, now it's like I'm that one of those guys, a Disney movie or whatever. She sends me a reel about grandchildren or whatever, and I'm like bawling my eyes out, right? So I'm feeling all of the emotions, but there was a part of my career where I was like literally rock solid, right? And I thought that's what a firefighter should have been, is that, non-emotional, can see someone's head cut off and go, oh well, and then just go back to eat my spaghetti, like right back at the hall. And that's not cool. Like, you got to be okay on the scene, but it's not so great at the hall or at the kitchen table at home. And that's what really happened to me. It kind of snuck up on me. But so kind of redefining this stoicism piece is important, I think, moving forward.
Yeah, and I think it sneaks up on all of us, because that's not something we are aware of. We don't train in it. We don't normalize it. We still have, unfortunately, that culture that, we just suck it up, move it on. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head on all those aspects at some point in time in my own career. I mean, we just don't get the opportunity to learn the basics of how to be well in all aspects of our life, right? You talked about awe, and one of my favorite books as of late is Dasher Keltner's book on awe. If you haven't read it, it is like the bomb mic drop moments.
Exactly.
It's all of these things that are starting to come out that can layer into better human performance, whether you're a clinical psychologist or whether you're a firefighter, police officer, just a regular, just awesome human being. Because all this stuff is now, I find, culminating into this really interesting time in our lives where it's more normal to talk about these things. There's lots of evidence-based research that's coming out that supports what we already knew 1,000 years ago with the Eastern medicine and some of the things that are going on, whether it's meditation or mindfulness. And now it's just culminating into this really interesting space where we can go, how do we just be better? Not good or bad, because that assigns blame somewhere, but just how can we take what we know and apply it to our own human performance so that we can move through the space of life And this, like, I got told in all the work that I did with mental health supports, especially in our reintegration thing, it's like hashtag this shit works. Well, right. So I came up with a t-shirt. It's got a phoenix on it and it's got hashtag this shit works on it. And because it does, and this is the thing that I think that we need to normalize, is that when we give people the opportunity to understand whatever that landscape is, we open up doors to possibilities that I don't think the individual or the group really understand.
I love that, man. Like, that's so awesome because it does work. And here's the thing, that's why I love Megan, is because we talk about this occupational awareness piece, right?
Yeah.
So because she can swear, and honestly, like, that's part of it for me. Is like I connect with people.
My mom's so proud, Steve. She's
yeah,
so proud.
exactly. And I love your mom, by the way. She's freaking
I
good.
know you
Yeah.
met my mom. That's
Yeah,
right.
it's so cool. But there's this relatability, this connection piece, and what we're really doing, all those things that you talked about, all these modalities and meditation, it has to be, we're responsible as leaders in this kind of field to do a knowledge translation to the front line. Because if you come across and it's floofy and whatever, and you just don't, that's why they talk about breath work. It's like, the cops love this tactical breathing, right? Make it sound cool. And so there's got to be this relatable factor where there's a buy-in. You have to have buy-in. And so this is the key piece where I find there's a disconnect between researchers and academia, where they have this high level stuff and it's not translated down. And everyone talks about knowledge translation, but truly it's not dumbing it down, because this demographic are highly intelligent, right? And we know this. And you don't want to insult them, but you also have to connect with them and relate to them. And having them part of that conversation, and know you've done that. That's the cornerstone of having subject matter experts as part of the development of this education awareness and knowledge translation, because that way there's credibility in it. Like, you have a whole bunch of letters behind your names and super smart folks, but we don't give a shit about that. Are you a human being that I can connect to and relate to? That's the key piece. And then, hey, I've got this stuff that works. So a hashtag in front of that.
Hashtag this stuff works.
Well, and it's funny you say that, because we had a CPS, a Calgary Police Service guest on a couple of weeks ago. And I had this moment where I was sort of sitting back, because it's like Ryan, who's been a paramedic for however long, and, Canada Task Force and all the like wild shit that would happen there. And then the CPS member, like, who's had a storied career, been on the streets, done all the stuff, like, tough police, whatever. And they're both sitting there talking about mindfulness and like how much it impacts them in terms of how, and I was just like, this is really cool, and I'm reflecting on that a little bit listening to you two, because I don't want to dismiss the experiences of women or other folks in the services, but I really appreciate the voices you two bring as men who are trying to talk to oftentimes other men about, like, you're actually allowed to have feelings. It's not even just okay for you to be vulnerable. You actually find strength through that vulnerability. Like, I admire that, and I think that's been such a missing part of at least our contemporary culture for a really long time. Like, I think we've just done such a disservice to men generally around allowing them to be whole.
Right.
So thoughts, men, go.
Oh, and go. I
Well,
don't know where to go with that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I agree. I think there's been, it's a cultural piece for me. I mean, I look at it from a cultural standpoint, that I was brought up by my father, a baby boomer. You don't cry. It was never implicitly told to me, you don't cry, you just don't. And then you translate that immediately into the work that I did on the front lines. And you're right, Steve. It's like, oh, you should be expecting to see these things, insert whatever horrific, horrible call that we've been to, and then just not have it impact you, and then be okay with that, right? And then no understanding about how all that stuff layers on. It's like that 7-layer taco dip that keeps getting piled on top. And then you could take a clinician who digs to the bottom of that 7-layer taco dip and starts unpacking that stuff. That's horrible, right? Like, that's a place that we don't want to go. But people like Brené Brown, which talks about vulnerability being courage, right?
Yeah.
My mentor in mindfulness, Richard Gerling with Mindful Badge, when he's an absolute badass when it comes to like policing, and he talks about courageous authenticity. So when we start changing those pieces, for me, it was like, what is this landscape I'm walking in? This is new. This is weird. This is exciting. And I think you're right. I mean, it doesn't mean that we have to sit down and cry after every call, but there is a vulnerability piece that I think I'm more than willing to access now than I ever have been in the span of my life, actually, in 50 years.
Look at us talk about Brene Brown, right? So
Yeah, I
I
know
was
exactly right.
I was going through a couple of things. I was going through a really dark time in my life, and one of my firefighter buddies bought me her book on what was it? Her latest one about all the emotions. It was like a whole.
Atlas of the Heart.
That's it. Thank
Atlas of
you.
the Heart,
Right.
yeah.
Atlas of the Heart. He gave that to me. I was like, and this guy I've helped through. Talk about stoic. And that here he shows up to my door, and I'm like in a dark place, and he hands me, and he goes, "I think this will be good for you." And the one thing that I loved about that from her, and Dr. Shields talked about this as well, is that's the key, right? It's vulnerability is literally the antidote to shame, and it takes great courage and strength. And that when I heard that, I'm like, they gave me permission to be vulnerable. And what happened when I became vulnerable, it gave others to be vulnerable. And that's what we're finding through our resiliency program. But I'll touch on that in a little second here. When you mentioned about the women in our frontline workers, I've helped so many through work safe claims and getting them into our resiliency program, and they are even more stoic. There's even more pressure on them. And yes, like you think about suicide rates in men, and there's not, but they are just whether they're stronger than us for sure. I think I know that, but that strength comes at a price, and so they have to. And I remember when we did our anti-stigma campaign, we don't have a female cop on our campaign because the two female police officers are like, I worked way too hard to get this reputation, to know that I can fit in, that I'm worthy of wearing this badge. I don't want my face on a poster. I don't want women being represented that way. And I was like, we were all like, holy shit, like we didn't expect that at all, but massive respect. But within their own selves, they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot a little bit because they need to have permission. But I get it. It's just this double-edged sword where they've worked so hard to fit in and be part of the team where, any sign of weakness and they're like, oh, it's because you're a woman, right? And it's like we have one of the officers that we have on my job is she is tough as nails, the strongest, most resilient woman. And she's a badass, but when she took a knee, she did it very privately. And so I reflect back, and several of the gals that I kind of supported along were very private about it. And they didn't come out of there. They talked to other women, but some of the guys that come through, a lot of the guys come through, they tell everybody, holy shit, went through Loon Lake, right? And they're way more open about it. And so that's just been my observation. I'm not sure if that's been your experience as well, but it's been very calculated, kind of. It's not been like, it's still within the shadows a little bit for them.
Yeah.
And I can appreciate and understand why.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And I think I think there's a lot of different kinds of barriers or challenges that women face that are unique. I mean, just like there's unique barriers that men face too, right? And I think, I mean, we're talking about stigma reduction and ways in which we do that. I think we also have to acknowledge we are still in a land where a lot of this is still stigmatized, right? Like, we still have at least 50% of people out there in these occupations saying, I still wouldn't feel comfortable coming forward, right? So, the risk for further tragedy, the risk that people are, being robbed of vitality and the ability to live fully, like that still is a reality. Hence I think why we're here,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The one thing that you touch on, I just wrote down, was this performance angle. And I think that really resonates, right? So it's resilience and performance, but we want high performing teams. And I think that's what there's athletics so much in this, like an industrial athlete, they call firefighters, right? And whether you're a paramedic or police officer or corrections or whatever, is like this, they're high performing people. And that's part of that stigma reduction is like, hey, you're not performing optimally. What's going on? Being curious about what's affecting your performance. And so that angle, and I talk to leadership about this, is like whether they're struggling with addictions or whatever, is like approaching things with curiosity will give them so much more permission to reach out. And I've got this example that one of the guys out of Texas came to me with, and this is just a leadership mentality. I just kind of wanted to switch gears to performance and leadership. He ex-military guy, really sad story, but in Texas, they have this zero tolerance, right? Like you show up to work intoxicated or under the influence, you're fired. No questions asked, zero tolerance. And so this guy shows up intoxicated. He basically gets suspended. They come in for the disciplinary hearing. Fire chief's in the room. I'm not sure if it was HR, obviously the union rep, and he comes in, sits down. They got the file folder on the table. And they basically, fire chief closes the folder and goes, whatever, I will just say his name was John. Said, John, you've been in the fire service for 23 years. You've mentored me. You've helped so many people in this job. It's like, this is not going to be a disciplinary hearing. We want to know what's going on for you. We want to help you. I get teary kind of thinking about it because the guy that's telling about it, he's one of our peer support guys. Is unbelievable. And basically, they got him into the Center of Excellence. It's the IFF version, F down in the States there. And so they literally got him into that program. And he came out back to work, like, success story. Like they saw him, they were, guy's a military vet, came into the fire service, added to his backpack, and was using drugs and alcohol or whatever it was to, cope. Got him help, came back, and he said to the union rep when he came back, he goes, "Thank God you sent me here, because after I thought I was going to be fired that day. And I was going to go out to the parking lot, and there was a gun in my glove box, and I was going to kill myself."
That was it. Yeah.
And to me, like that's the first time I was told that story without bawling my eyes out, because that just shows you that the leaders, if they don't show that curiosity and caring empathy, these are human beings, right? And so often performance is connected to discipline, and just like they don't make that connection, right, you guys? And there needs to be a fundamental shift in how we look at our biggest asset is our first responders and frontline workers, right? Totally. And so let's treat them with dignity and respect.
Well, and I said this to
two statements. Oh, sorry, Megan. There's two statements that come out of that. First thing is we don't hire bad employees, we create bad employees.
Yeah.
Right? By not giving them opportunities to grow and learn in whatever aspect. And the other thing is nobody gets up in the morning and puts their feet on the ground and say, today I'm going to be an asshole.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen. So I do appreciate that leadership and human performance piece, because that's where it comes from. Like, that's my heart, kind of where I want to take things. Do you want a police officer or a paramedic that responds with kindness and compassion to a patient or an interaction? Or do you want somebody to react to it? So we've got, obviously the threat continuum within policing and paramedics and, firefighters, same thing. But how do you want to show up? We got to teach that. Right? Yeah. We got to teach that with non-judgment. Yeah. We got to teach that with emotional intelligence. We've got to teach that with all the pieces, so that when somebody gets a complaint, it's like, wait a minute, this is not you. Hang on. What is going on with you? You're still culpable, right? Yep. We're going to do our investigation. And at some point in time, you will have to answer to whatever that might be. Yeah. But in this moment, I don't care about this. Let's put this aside and let's deal with the human. How are you? And that's just, when you said that, I'm like, I'm all in. Right. Yeah. We need to figure out a curriculum around that, because that's just the best way to go about it.
Yeah.
Sorry, Megan.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, Ryan, you've heard me say this. I really love, you've recently been more specific about talking about these things from the perspective of human performance. And I just love that, right? Because I think then it's like people, in the US, as you probably know, Steve, like they don't even like to talk about mental health. They talk about behavioral health, right? Yes. And so it's still like, right, we still have difficulty with the language. But I think this notion of human performance, and we all, anyone I think who's got a work ethic and is, passionate about what they do, whatever, right? Like we all kind of want to have this elite ability to perform. And I think that's just one of those destigmatizing things. If I'm thinking about how can I best perform, how can I continue to reach potential, right? Question though, like I had a little tear pop to eye too when you told that story, Steve, but like how rare do you think that is?
Not rare. Rare, like rare how that was dealt with?
That the leaders would relate to that guy like that.
Frick yeah, it's rare.
It's rare, right?
God, I don't want to throw, no, God, yes, because my job is dealing.
And this isn't about blaming people, right? We're not blaming individuals. We're looking at systems level change, which takes time, right?
Yeah,
there's our disclaimer.
Yeah, that's the disclaimer. Is culturally, I think we're not there yet. I think that exemplified what we need to do as a leadership and how to treat employees. That's not normal. I still have people being disciplined, being fired, addiction is looked at as a disciplinary issue, right? Or even just like you're getting not promoted because you had a mental health issue in your past. And so there's still a lot of work around that to do. But if you want a foundation for all this to work, is you have to have a safe workplace. And I think the CSA standards started that down the path. I think it's personally really clunky and no one's been able to really implement it, the psychological standard. And so in BC, we created some recommended practices. But what I've noticed is those practices were created, all the things that we know should be done in an organization to create a safe and healthy workplace psychologically, is no one's really taken that on and going, we're doing everything here. And so it's piecemeal. And so we're really not all in yet. And even though we know the economic impact, and never mind it's the right thing to do piece, it's still not, we still don't have these psychologically safe workplaces, especially in the first responder and public safety world. And so there's been a lot of check boxes along the way. I don't know at what point, and in fact, we're doing a leadership summit coming up here at the end of March or end of February with Dr. Shields and WorkSafe BC and the First Responder Committee. And we're really hitting those leaders because we're seeing psychological injuries continue, right? Even with our presumption, like we had the acceptance rate really hasn't changed. We were accepting claims because we know we were exposed to trauma, but there's just something, again, it's over the waterfall. And so we still have these workplaces where people still don't feel safe to reach out for help. And we're talking people 10 years, 15 years on the job, peer supporters that aren't reaching out for help. You've got people in leadership roles that are fear, there's still stigma that exists, right? And so there's this organizational piece that we all need to tackle. And you said about, we need to curriculum around leadership training. I've done fire officer 1 and 2 and emergency scene management, and I'm a safety officer and all those things. I've had 3 hours of psychological training, like within the fire service in 30 years in the fire service, right? Yeah. And now we've got BOSS and we've got the first responder, the occupational awareness series, or firefighters. That's where it starts, but leadership needs to we need to have something specific for them, because I'm not sure if you know this or this is your observation, but the organizational stress piece has overshadowed any trauma 100%. That I've ever seen. Like every time I deal with somebody, I have to peel away the organizational piece in order to get a claim approved, because I'm like, that's not part of the presumption. It's not in the DSM. Now, if it was in the DSM, probably 90% of the first responders would be diagnosed with organizational stress disorder or something like.
Well, no, and Steve, actually, like we've got, like, there's empirical science that's backing that up now, right? Like, I mean, if I think about what we knew and what I taught on and how I practiced 10, 15 years ago, it was totally critical incident, stress management, whatever, use that term. And now you see just as much of the variance of how someone is getting diagnosed being because of organizational factors, right? And there is some precedent that, an organizational related issue could be reflective of an adjustment disorder, right? So, I mean, we've seen some precedent where people are diagnosed with adjustment disorders, which is directly related to the workplace environment. So I'm with you. It's funny. I taught for a couple of days this week to clinicians who are interested in working with first responders. And I really talked about how, like, when presumption came in Alberta, that was in 2012, right? It's a little bit different across different parts of the country. I mean, there was so much for about 5 years, I think, of like, what is this thing? And why are people getting injured? And we were trying to understand trauma and stressor conditions. Then I think it shifted a little bit into looking at, like, we've got to include the family in this conversation, right? There was a whole thing that came through the National Action Strategy for PTSD that's like family members and spouses need to be involved in this. And then I've really seen it in the last, like, 3 years, where it's like, what are we doing for the organizations as a whole? Because it's like, it's one thing to, like, help an individual, get them out of the river when they've fallen over the waterfall. But if you're not going upstream and looking at why are they falling in the first place, right? Desmond Tutu's language, then, right, we're failing people.
Yeah. That is so true, because we'll spend so much time, sorry, Ryan, we'll spend so much time and energy. You said getting them out from the water, from the river. But if you put them back in a toxic organization and being back to trauma, going to trauma calls, you're just going to re-injure the person, and they're shocked that the person, regresses. Like they're like, oh my God, like, oh, like what's going on here? A treatment didn't work. Oh, they're treatment resistant. No, it's the fucking
Right.
organization that's broken. Pardon my language, but it is. It's truly like you're just throwing them back into the lion's den, right?
Yeah.
So
Well, so like you have the ear of WorkSafe. Like, are they receptive to this? Because I'm telling you, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna swear now. Sorry, Mom. But like it just fucking drives me crazy that we're at this stage again. It feels like at least
Yeah.
that we're having to argue and talk about like the picture is bigger and broader when we're talking about psychological injury and first responders.
Yeah.
It is just not the same equation.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're having to like, I don't know, I feel like I'm back in a space of having to do a lot of advocacy around, can we think holistically and comprehensively about what's happening for this person? And if there's ways in which they're resistant to treatment, there may be other contextual factors we're not considering, like
yes. Oh
seems pretty
yeah.
fucking
Yeah.
common
Yeah.
sense to me.
I
But
know. It's frustrating.
Well,
And
it's the sanctuary trauma thing, right?
yes.
So-
Yeah. I just heard that term
Right.
recently. It's so
So
true.
when I was
Yeah.
doing the reintegration work, which it sounds to me
Oh, yeah.
is pretty similar to the resilience piece for you guys, that's what I heard. I don't hate my job, I hate my employer, or I don't dislike the calls I go to. Yes, they're difficult, but I can manage those. I dislike the lack of support. So what the fuck is next, right? It's how do we see, and then they changed the presumptive legislation in the background. Cumulative stress is no longer compensable, and now we're talking about specific calls.
That's bull
Well,
crap.
I think I've got a sea can full of,
Yeah.
and probably more, right, of
Yeah.
boxes that we've packed away. But really, that's the frustrating piece is, workplace compensation boards, workplace BC, I do agree. It's not just the calls. It is the organizational
Yeah.
structures, perceived lack of supports, the sanctuary trauma that occurs with going back to work. And I mean,
Yeah.
I saw that with so many people. They go back to work, they do all this hard work through therapy. We do, the reintegration process. We do all these things and then they get back to work and nothing's changed. And
Yeah.
then they re-injure or they're just like, I'm out and they
Yeah.
leave.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
well, and Steve, I'd love to hear your perspective on this. Ryan, you too. Like, you
Yeah.
guys know, I mean, I took a little bit of time off last year because I kind of hit a bit of a wall of my own for a number of reasons. And, it was really hard to do because I was really scared about how people were going to perceive me and all these things, whatever.
Mhm.
And like, almost like unequivocally, all I received was support and encouragement and like, good for you and all the things. And then additionally, when I went back to work, it was just like, nothing but pace yourself. We've got this, like you take the time you need, like just again, just nothing but support and encouragement and validation and like so much relief, like palpable relief that I felt in that. And honestly, like I'm probably the best at this moment in time that I've ever been in my entire life. And that is directly because I've been able to reinvest in work. I've received the support. Whatever. And I stopped myself several times over that period of time going like, this is possible for people. Like this should be
Mhm.
what everybody experiences. And I
Yeah.
know that my experience and what I'm going through and how this is helping me is like probably 0.005% of what people receive.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And isn't that a tragedy? Isn't that just shameful?
It is shameful. Oh my God. I'm so proud of you that you did take a knee because we need more people. I'm so proud of you because that
Mhm.
gives it, like I said before, I did the same thing in 2019. I took my own knee, went through our own program. And because I wanted to be a better dad, I wanted to be a better firefighter. I wanted to be coming from a place of knowledge and experience when it came to going through that program itself that we created. But that is the anomaly, that experience, right? There's so few
Yeah.
people that go back, and you've built this wonderful, caring community around you. And I feel like you're part of my tribe as well. I could reach out to you.
Mhm.
And we all know that if you have minimum 3 people that have your back, that ties right in with longevity and it ties in psychological health and safety and all those things. But that it is shameful that we don't have that experience for more people, because so often we go back and there's still that mentality where you get a cake and balloons when you break your leg or fall off a ladder, but you come up
Right.
back with, and they don't know what to do. They're like, oh God, like they don't know how to act. We still are there, unfortunately.
I know.
But
I know.
experiencing what you experienced, that's how it should be. It should be
If
like
that's how
high
it should be.
fives. Yeah.
I know,
Way to
I know,
go.
I know. And I mean, and it's just been such a renewed source of motivation and focus because it's just like until this is like the commonplace experience, like we have so much more work to do, and
Yeah.
and again, I think people are doing, I agree with you, Steve. Like I think people are more willing to come forward and do all the things they need to do to get help to a point, but
Yeah.
they are not having that experience of being like welcomed and comforted and encouraged back into those tribal environments that particularly within the work environment. So like I want us to celebrate so many of the accomplishments and the wins and all the things and like the amazing work you and Matt have been doing, Steve, and like in BC, I feel like you guys really do, set a standard for how things can be. And we just have so much more to do,
Yeah. Oh, big time. Yeah.
Well, it's bringing along the claims people alongside with all of this training too. So I think
Yeah.
we need to look at every single person that touches a claim, where whatever organization that might be,
Yeah.
everybody needs to have that buy-in, right? Whether
Yeah.
you're somebody that does payroll, right? That impacts their pay when they go off, right? So I get a phone call, I'm off on an occupational stress injury leave, and I get a payroll call, and they're like, "Yeah, sorry, your paperwork's behind. You're not getting a paycheck next month."
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Let's add to the
Sorry,
pile.
what the fuck?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
So
Exactly.
it's all across the span of a person's claim. It's the peer support at work, it's the chiefs, it's the senior leadership across their organization, it's the claims, it's the workplace BC, it's the physicians, it's everybody we need to touch, because one person says the wrong thing, and I've seen it,
Oh, yeah.
where you've got pension.
Yeah.
It's the pension people too. Oh, you haven't been at work for 9 months because you've been off on an occupation. Oh, by the way, you owe the pension $25,000 for back pay.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. And they
Right.
don't know the impact of that
Right.
statement,
So
right?
we can
Yeah.
create some of that kind of understanding, like, hey, when you do this, this is the potential that you're actually doing. So I think there's just this awesome landscape that we can get into of supporting an individual from beginning to end on their claim. And that's
Yeah.
where I think we can get to. It just takes the vulnerability on everybody's part to come together and work collectively that I
Yeah.
don't see.
Yeah. I mean, that's
Steve, I want to write a how-to book with you.
yeah, I think,
Yeah.
I mean, we have the roadmap. I honestly think we can, right? It's
Yep.
it's creating recommended practices and
Yeah.
and coming from a place of, but there has to be a desire and a willingness. And we have the business case. Like, we know we can do a gap analysis. We have the business case. We know that there's the data and research to back it up. And there's the why is there, but I don't know why it's so hard to have the will. Like, I haven't cracked that nut. Some people, we've done lots of conferences, we've done some workshops, like building a resilient workplace, and people have these aha moments. And I got people up in Fort St. John that totally bought in. They came in, they're like, they saw this, it made total sense. Now they've got wellness checks. Matt's flying up there with 2 psychologists and a counselor. They're doing check-ins, they're doing the SIP-CERT indicators. They're doing every 6 months, right? They're doing spouse nights. They've given them access to resources and counseling, adequate counseling. Like, they're little things like that we want to celebrate, that they're doing it right. And we need to model that in every single public safety system. So there is a template. Just got to get people to buy in, and that's going to be that's our challenge right now. It's getting them to buy in. Yeah.
Well, and I think it's also, and yeah, I mean, we could muddle around about this because I think about this a lot too, and I don't have a solution or an answer either. Because, like, when I go and talk to leaders and organizations, they are bought in. They're like, we want this. Yes, like, I want this to be how it is. And then it doesn't happen. So I go, well, okay, is it a funding issue? Therefore, is it governmental advocacy that we need to be doing, like, on a federal level? Is it like, where does it get stalled? And how does it go from groups of individuals who are really recognizing the importance of this to crickets? How does that happen? Right?
I know. That's the frustrating part, because when I see that
Yeah.
Fort St. John just did it like that, like just like that. And so I've been watching the evolution of the BC Paramedics like the BCHS over the years. So I'm looking at them from 2016 to now. It took them a while, but they're finally getting their shit together. And I'm starting to see some resources in place, and they've got the right people in the right positions. But that's like literally watching paint dry. Like, it was painful to see. And they all were at the table with the right mindset, but it was like, to change that bureaucracy and having everybody on, like, singing from the same song sheet took a long time. But when you have little departments that are way more nimble that can implement this, is it money? Because in BC alone, it's costing $40 million alone for firefighter claims. Never mind police, paramedics, everything. $40 million a year. You give me $40 million, I can tell you what I can do with that. Everyone's getting, you can imagine, exactly. I could spend that on, like, unlimited counseling, education, right up from recruit to retirement, right? Like, treatment programs if required, spouse education, partner education, keeping your kids healthy, like all the things we know to
And
do.
you could come under budget. You could do that for less than $40 million in a year.
Hell yeah, I could do that for 3.2 million, but I'm not going to tell them that.
Right.
You just did.
No, give us the 40. Give us the 40. We'll balance the books.
Damn it,
That's
Ryan. Yeah. I'd love to talk about the resiliency program though, if you've got some time, because I'm super proud of that. And it's something that, when we talk about making a difference, like for me, I've really had to kind of reprogram my brain of my span of control or my sphere of influence. And so I really struggled with this, where I felt things were out of control, so it became very controlling. And I think a lot of first responders kind of deal with this stuff. So we created this program with Blueprint, Dr. Shields, Dr. Cool, and it was based off the Veterans Transition Program, and then we did some whole bunch of interviews. And anyway, that's like 2017 we did our first pilot. We've got 280 people come through the program. The cops are catching up. They've done 13 programs and put over 100 people through. And so the impact of 3.5 days, like, when you go to supportive counseling and it's like once a week or once every couple of weeks, like this is intensive, like 10-hour days for 3.5 days. And the results coming out of there, the data coming out of there, it's like we're shifting people from surviving to thriving within 3.5 days. And we're like, how is that possible? But we know this group cohesion. And Megan, you came through one of ours and you saw the magic that happens with proper facilitation, people that are brave and showing courage to take a knee and share their story, and the psychoeducation piece and whatever's happening within that dynamic. We are shooting off these mental health champions and planting seeds like across Canada now, from Halifax to freaking the island. We've had people come through that program. I had a guy, 2 people coming through from Ontario. We've had, like I said, Manitoba, a guy from Washington, DC, we came through, like volunteers. We've got BC Wildfire coming through now. Anyway, it's been a really, really cool run. So if we can concentrate on, I got to get funding for this bloody program, because Movember just ran out. We had 400 and some odd grand from Movember to run 2 years worth of police and fire programs, but they've been able to cover our clinician costs. But we're still going gangbusters. But this is part of that continuum of care where you get them if they're. This is not treatment, right? This is not an over the waterfall intervention. Although I just literally, before I jumped on this call, I had a guy reach out and says, I got a guy in crisis. I'm like, it's not a crisis program, but we're going to put him in because he's stable at work. He's staying at work, and he's just put up his hand. He's waited too freaking long, but it's going to be a launch pad to get him into possibly treatment or get him to see a counselor. It's going to be a counseling, or I would call a treatment readiness program almost.
Well, and you know what? And that's a win. Like I think if somebody comes and learns a little bit and starts to talk about things, and then they're like, yeah, I need to keep this going, that's a total win. That's a positive outcome of an intervention like that. So this is the First Responder Resiliency Program. This is what it's still called?
Yeah. So with this, there's a firefighter resiliency program and now a police resiliency program. And it's been freaking unreal. We got 7 more running this year. And it's going gangbusters. And we want to train more clinicians to replicate this, because my buddy who's been sending, Mike Sears, out of Halifax Fire, he just keeps sending people. They had that really tragic apartment fire. A bunch of kids died. And anyone that was involved in that calls, he's basically calling up, said, you need to go. And we've just been, driving them up to Loon Lake. And it's been literally saving lives coast to coast, which is, it's so cool, like, to be part of that. So it's one of my proudest
it's amazing.
things. Yeah.
When you bring people like that together. So it's always still done at Loon Lake?
Yep. Yeah, we did one on the island, but it's out of Maple Ridge. It's just gorgeous. It's right by the lake. It's kind of ironic that it's called Loon Lake, a little bit, but going up to Looney Lake.
Yeah, totally.
It is, but it's
so Brian, so like I went out and did, I can't remember, it was one of the earlier programs, because it was.
Oh yeah.
I have a few key memories from that trip. One being meeting you, Steve, and I remember our drive out and all the things we talked about, including the idea of a mulligan in our lives. And then
exactly.
And then it was so cold in this place. My hands actually turned purple, and David Cool was like, do you have like that Raynaud's disorder or whatever? And I was like, no, I'm just cold. It's the BC humidity. I don't know.
Exactly.
Dr. Duncan Shields and Dr. David Cool are like, there's not a ton of people in my life still who intimidate me, and these two sure do, like in the best possible way, because they're just so smart. They're so easy to engage with. They present and educate. They just know how to get into the heart of people. And so, Ryan, there's like a little bit of education on the one night, and then essentially it's bringing groups of people together. Like I think there was 12 or 15 or something in our group, and everybody gets this opportunity to really deeply share, what is it, Steve, 1 or 2 stories from either early life or career that's been really impactful. And holy shit, like I just remember sitting there for that weekend, and I was there to try to learn the program, whatever. And it was unbelievable to me, the kinds of stories that people were sharing that they were coming in with, like talking about walking wounded,
And it's been eye-opening. One thing, like you share these same qualities that Duncan and David share, Megan, like is this humility and curiosity. And those are the people that we partnered up with. And so and they create that space, right? You feel seen and heard because they've actually can be vulnerable and share a little bit about their stuff. And when you say they're intimidating, I've had to get over that because I'm like, God, they got big brains, right? They're working at a high level, but their humility disarms me. And they keep saying like, I feel like we're peers, right, in this battle together. But the themes that are coming out of this program, it's this, what blew us all away. It's this these ACEs, these childhood experiences, and the why they got into protecting people. And this is coming from the police and fire and paramedics, is that they come into the service to protect people, whether it's from past physical, sexual, emotional abuse, abandonment. Like all these things are percolating up in the program, and we're like, holy Dinah. Like you said walking wounded, like there's a lot of people that are high functioning, but they're carrying this shame for years. And then this is the first place where they feel safe enough with a group of strangers to actually open up and go, and share that really profound experience, that flashbulb memory, that, or whatever it is. And even for myself, that timelining that we did, holy mackerel, was that impactful for my own personal self. You took your earliest childhood memory to becoming into the service, and then service to now. And I'd never done that, Ryan. You talk about your CCAN, man. Like I unloaded my backpack for the first time in 6 years it was. And I wrote, and in fact, I came back from that program. I wrote like 30 pages of calls that I remembered from that. Like it opened up my Rolodex, and I was just like, holy, I'd really boxed off a lot of this stuff. I've been carrying a lot of stuff. So anyway, that's
We all do.
right. It's heavy. I could not believe how heavy it was, and I hear this constantly. People come out of that program, they feel like a weight has been lifted. So it's been transformative. It's really, really cool.
No, it's really cool. No, and that's awesome. And so is the intention to start trying to offer it in different provinces, or like, is that what you're saying about training other clinicians?
Yeah, I think the vision is we want to keep this as a learning hub. And so David and Duncan basically want to bring in, and it's by invitation only. Like it will literally be, you've got to have a vouch, right? Like, I'd have Jason Curry out of Calgary would say, okay, I want Megan to come through. We want to start a program in Alberta. Or my buddy Mike Steers. I said, bring the psychologists or counselors that you want to work with. We'll train them. We'll do some ride-alongs. We'll give them a curriculum. And then we want to be creating a hub, whether it's in Halifax or in Manitoba or wherever it is. But we want it to feed into each other. So we really want to grow this organically and really slowly, and we don't want it to be taken over by this national lens. And I think that's kind of what happened with the Veterans Transition Program that happened, was literally they built that in BC in 97, exploded across, and they lost control of it. And there was it's got to grow organically. So I think that's the next steps, is to really get some money to continue the research and data collection, but to really start training folks to do this in other provinces. I think that's the key. We need to. They can't have people coming from Halifax constantly. Like they need to have something where they can drive to, really.
Completely. And so because inevitably someone, we have listeners now. Inevitably someone's going to be interested and want to do this. So like, where should they go if they want more information?
So there is the website. If they looked up BC Firefighter Resiliency Program, there's a Google site that we created. It's got testimonials. It's got about the program, about the clinicians. It's got contact info, And you can actually donate on the page as well, which
Oh, right on,
donations
right on,
really
right on.
are helpful.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what about Movember? Because I know you're really involved with them. So like where is that at? What's happening with that?
So the Movember money ran out, and
Okay.
or it's run out. February is going to be our last program for police and fire. That are the clinician costs have been covered. And so that was a one-time grant. We kind of reached out to them and asked, like, sniffing around to see if they would give us continue funding, or at least fund this, like 450 grand. I think they just announced $100 million towards mental health out when they were big announcement out of Australia, but I don't think we're on their radar. And they did some amazing videos for us that we use in spouse nights, and it's actually embedded in our video series, and we use that for a lot of keynotes. And so it's been a great partnership, but we really haven't heard anything since then. So it's kind of whether we have to move on, maybe we have to move on, but I'd love for them to continue on, because we support Movember tons, right, through the fire world and the first responder world, right across Canada. And so I don't know where that's at. It's kind of in flux right now. I'll report back.
Yeah. No, do, and we can update if and when that happens. But okay, that's good to know for sure. So like with where you are, you're going to retire in a year and a bit. What are you looking to do post retirement? Like, are you going to stay connected to this stuff after you're done?
Oh, absolutely, as much as I can be. With my buddy Matt Johnston there, we're just getting started. And so we just got funding for year 2 of our video series. And so we're going to be starting filming that. Duncan's already been filmed, so he's building that out. We're going to be developing some leadership training, and we're going to continue any local or any fire department or like any organization that wants us to come in and kind of build that peer training, psychoeducation piece and check-ins, et cetera, building that, fulsome kind of wellness piece. That's going to continue. And we've kind of are starting to partner up with the physical side of things, like UBC Sports Cardiology and their team, Dr. Tim Doty, who used to run Fortius. He's been huge in the fire service with physical health, cancer screening, and stuff like that. So we think we want to bring all of this under an umbrella to offer like a full suite of services for fire departments. So that's kind of, I think, next steps. And you know what? If I'm just going to Mexico and hanging out with my bro and my family and my daughter, that's cool as well. But I don't want to leave this stuff. Like you said, there's just so much more work to do. And anything I can do, this stuff fills my cup. Like it literally does. And I'm super passionate about it. So it's not the end. It's just the end of my fire career.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. What would you say if your daughter came to you and wanted to become a firefighter?
Oh, shit. Great question. She doesn't, so I'm like, thank God.
So you're like, okay, I don't have to think.
Yeah, I don't have to answer that. I love my job. I absolutely love the fire service, and I wouldn't have given up. It's taken something for me. It's definitely taken something for me. I'm not the same person that I came into this occupation that when I first started. And I know, Ryan, you're nodding your head too. I'm sure I'm not the same Steve Farina when I came in at 19 years old. I think if my daughter entered into the fire service, she would love the career because it's super challenging and it's so fulfilling. But I would want to pick the fire department that she works for, truly. And because I work with so many services across BC, and I know the organizational culture, I'd be adamant of several, and I won't name them, but I would be like, you're not working there, because that is just going to, you're going to see stuff, but you just don't need, you want to talk sanctuary trauma, organizational trauma, like I would not recommend working at those organizations. So yes, I would still encourage her if she wanted to do that. But I'd guide her a lot, if you will.
Yep.
Yeah. What do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, no, I hear you. I'd be like, okay, let's get you lined up with a psychologist. Let's do some mental health literacy training on the front end.
Yep.
Let's get all these things in place. And you know what? Yeah, I agree. It's a great job. I loved what I got to do, and I was blessed to be able to step into many different roles. But I left a piece there when I left, and I retired.
I tell you, I'm getting out early. Like this will be, I can work. We have mandatory retirement at 60. I'll be 52 and change when I retire. And a lot of people are like, "That's insane. You're leaving a lot of money on the table." I'm like, "No, I've already left a lot on the table, and it's like it's part of my soul." So I want to get out with as much of like I'm in a really good place, like you, Megan. Like I'm in a really good emotional place right now. But I can tell you, I went back to work. I buggered up my shoulder last year, and I was off a bunch, which was unbelievable. Like in my 6 years, I was like, that's the first time I've been off for more than 20 days. But when I came back, the emotional toll kind of surprised me because I came back and it was a cardiac. It was granddaughter, founder was doing CPR. Anyway, I was like, that call, I was like, I'm not prepared for this. I didn't realize how quickly or how full I was, if you will. And I thought I hadn't been working for months. And I'm like, I was taking great care. I was kayaking, biking, hiking. Like I was like, and then I came back and it all came back. So I'm not sure if I hadn't processed enough stuff. I thought I was in a good place, but holy mackerel, it's accumulative. It literally is. And it just takes that one like straw that broke the camel's back. And to be part of that vicarious, and it was just vicarious trauma. I wasn't even working the call. I was dealing with the family. And so I was kind of shaken a little bit by that. I'm like, I don't feel like I'm prepared to be in this role as a captain to take care of my crews when I'm like almost crying with this kid that just had her, grandmother die on her. Yeah. So anyway, I'm getting out in the right time, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And I think there's wisdom in that, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
it's when the people I struggle with, like, and I mean struggle, like I struggle to help them so much because they're so fixed on it, is the people who live by shoulds, right? Like I should be able to go to 60, so therefore I'm going to, because that's what I'm supposed to, you know what I mean? And it's like these rules that people live by regardless of what life is telling them or what they actually need. So I think there's real wisdom in being able to go, no, like that's it, I've got other ways I can help, I've got other ways I can be of service, right? Or I can go live in Mexico.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll take
I
that
don't
as
know.
alternative.
Mexico sounds like a good plan, actually.
Yeah,
For
completely.
sure.
Steve, you're the best. I'm so looking forward to seeing you in April. It's going to be
Same.
awesome to see you and to talk with you and Matt and to go to the conference, the spa, and all the
I
things
know.
we're going to do.
We're doing it. Absolutely. Self-care. Sure.
Yeah, man.
I'm looking
Totally.
Go do some
Well, and
hot
it's just,
rocks.
it's no coincidence to me that one of the best spas in Calgary is going to be literally across the street from where we're going to be. So
We should book now.
we should book now. We should. Okay, I'll text you and Matt, and we'll get that going.
Excellent. That sounds great. And Ryan, will
We are
see you
actually presenting at a conference.
Yeah.
And we're just going to do this afterwards.
Oh, sure. Sounds good. Yeah. Whatever happens, I'm along for the ride. I mean, I think Megan knows this. We usually just have crazy ideas and just go do it. So
Let's do it.
whether it's ruck marching in the desert in March or whether
Yeah.
it's bicycling in France, I don't know
Yeah,
how we get
no,
into these
totally.
things.
It's amazing, you
Totally.
guys. Totally amazing.
Mm.
So good to see you. And it was a pleasure meeting you, Ryan. And
It's
I
a pleasure
love
meeting you too.
the conversation. So
Yeah,
lots of
well,
work to
thank you
do.
so much. Thank you for taking some time and joining us. You had so much to offer, Steve. It's awesome.
My pleasure. Absolutely.
Okay,
All
we'll
right,
see you
everybody.
again soon. Okay,
Take care.
bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Mental Health Mixtape, brought to you by the Before Operational Stress Program. We hope today's conversation has resonated with you and provided valuable insights into navigating the complexities of mental health. Remember, your well-being is our priority. If you or someone you know could benefit from the support and resources offered by the Before Operational Stress Program, don't hesitate to reach out. Take that first step towards a healthier, more resilient you. And here's a special treat for our dedicated listeners. A 15% discount waits for you when you sign up through the code provided in the show notes. Investing in your mental health has never been more accessible. We appreciate your continued support and commitment to breaking the stigma surrounding mental health. Let's keep the conversation going, and until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.